So I'm going to introduce you to my audience because they definitely are going to be familiar with at least some of your work. For people who don't know, you are Vincent Balderrama.
Or Vinnie.
Or Vinnie Balderrama. And you are a retired LAPD detective. And you were one of the original homicide detectives on the Biggie murder case. And you were also present for his autopsy. And you interviewed witnesses that anyone who's watched my channel is definitely going to be familiar with.
Well, I joined the department in 1981. Spent 10 years working patrol in different fields, like Special Problems Unit, which is still considered a patrol unit. And then I took the detective's exam. My most time was spent at Rampart, and most of my career I spent working gangs and homicide.
And what attracted you to? Did you choose that? Is that what you wanted to do?
Oh yeah. Once I got to, I had very few training officers who would interact with gang members until I got to Newton Division, and then all of a sudden I was exposed to various Hispanic gangs as well as some black gangs, and it was intriguing. And plus, I found that I could talk to them. I had a rapport with the gang members, and most of it was by treating them with respect and to some degree. You never trust them, but you treat them with some respect. So I became a detective trainee in Rampart Crash, which is, if you don't know, CRASH is the acronym for Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums. That was an awesome name.
And so that was the gang unit for...
That was all the city of Los Angeles. If you had a gang unit, it was CRASH.
Okay.
It remained CRASH until the whole fiasco with Rafael Perez and the embarrassment that it caused, and I guess...
The whole Rampart scandal and all of that.
Right.
So how did you end up at homicide at Wilshire Division?
December 95, I made detective, but I went on vacation. And I know I'd showed up at Wilshire in January, the first week of January, and I was teamed up with my partner, who was a P3 detective trainee as well, Jose Chavez. And I knew Chavez from cases,
Right.
And now he became my partner.
So you started at Wilshire Division January of '96, so just a little over a year before Biggie is murdered.
Right.
Because he was, he's killed in March of '97. Tell me, when do you get the first phone call about Biggie's homicide? What happened? How you
Ray Fatami called me and said, "Hey Vinnie, they got this, murder over at the Peterson's Museum. Biggie Smalls." I said, I said, "Who's that?" Because that wasn't my music in any way.
What do you listen to?
She really? I just flew back from the Greek Theater to watch Echo and the Bunnymen.
I did not see that coming at all.
Oh no, my top bands are Boingo, Echo, Joy Division. My first concert in high school, Jimi Hendrix. I went, and that was 1969.
Wow.
At the Forum.
That's a great year to get into music.
Took my wife to Zeppelin.
Long way of saying you don't know hip hop, 90s hip hop. That's not your genre.
No, I didn't. Unless it was played on some really popular radio station, but I was listening to K-Rock or KMET.
So Detective Utami calls you.
He called me up.
Rapper Biggie Smalls has been shot.
Yeah, he called me up. Because I was usually get to work by 7 anyway. But he called me. I think it was like 4 or 5 in the morning, and said Kelly and his partner had this case, Biggie Smalls. I said, "I don't know who that is," and he says, "He's a rap singer." I said, "Okay." He says, "Can you come in and give him a hand?" I said, "Sure." So I got up. 15 minutes out, I was out the door, when I got to the station. Well, no, I went to the scene. I went to the station. Chavez and I hooked up. That's what it was, because that's how we usually would do it.
So you went to the intersection where it happened, or the hospital?
No, the hospital was another story.
Oh, okay.
Because that was handled by someone else, because one of the detectives told me that he rolled off the gurney at the hospital.
Really?
And they had to perform their life-saving measures on the floor. And I don't know if you even knew that.
I did not know. I never heard that.
I heard that night. It says
Biggie rolled off the gurney in the hospital.
When they were trying to get him in, that he rolled off and it was on the ground, on the floor.
Wow.
But
he was almost 400 pounds. So
390 pounds, exact.
So a lot to move around, obviously.
So we went I hooked up with Chavez. We got our car. I talked to Kelly wasn't there. It was another detective that gave us a brief overview, and then we said we'll go to the location, which we did, and did a cursory. There's not much to see. They're collecting the evidence, and then they said we'll go back to the station. Met so that Cooper was going to divvy up what he wanted us to do. He says, "Can you go to the autopsy? It's going to be, I think it was that morning, or later on that."
Yeah, it was the 10th. Yeah.
Yeah, it was that.
It was. I think it was at like 10 a.m. on the 10th.
Right, on the
very
10th.
next-
So there was the next. He
next
was
day.
killed on the 9th,
Yeah.
and it was the next day,
was
the
like-
10th. They
yeah.
said, "Yeah, we'll go to that."
Wow. So before the autopsy, real quick. So were you at Fairfax and Wilshire for a moment?
For a moment, well, only to see what, to kind of get a feel for what.
What do you remember? Do you remember
was.
what you saw there, or what it felt
Well,
like?
at the time, it was pretty much sanitized, except for I think the photographer was there, still there.
Yeah.
Evidence tags. There was still that tape, and we got an idea of where the car, had turned. Impala.
Right.
Had turned right on the Wilshire, and disappeared.
Tell me, you mentioned seeing Diddy or something that.
That night of that day, actually the night, because it all rolled into one. Cooper went to the hospital, and he was cooperative, but he was like cowering back, like I think they described it as being a little sissy.
Yeah, I've seen his FI card from the hospital,
Yeah.
and it says, refused to cooperate, or
Right,
refused
but
to
he
give
wanted to,
information.
because he was cowering back, but he wanted to talk, but he didn't, and then little Evie, what?
Faith Evans, Biggie's estranged wife, was there.
And she was the same way. Wanted to cooperate, but didn't, in a sense, and cowering away, and was like, and the way it was described to me was that Sean was being a little pussy. Yeah.
Wow.
He was being, and next thing I know, what we heard was the tent. They were staying at, can't remember the hotel.
They were spread out. There was some at the Sheraton, Universal Sheraton,
Right,
like Faith Evans was there.
that's where
and
it
then
was.
some were at the what became the W Hotel in Westwood.
Right. And
The Westwood Marquee.
yeah, I think
and then Puffy had been staying at someone's house off and on too in the hills. So it was like, yeah.
So I think it was the 11th. I think that was when they all flew out to New York. Everybody left.
Yeah.
It was like a ghost town to try to find them, and
Right.
and they're all going to lawyer up type of thing. So
Yeah, there was one story that Puffy was taken to the airport in the trunk of a car because he was. They didn't know who done it, and they didn't know who else is the target. Yeah. I think and now they're in enemy territory.
oh
in LA.
yeah, I didn't hear that, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Right, based on what you heard.
Yeah.